Oh, thanks so much. Boy, it's a delight to be here in this place of story. Charleston has that feel to it, and all these other storytellers. It's very exciting to come to a festival for me. I love the energy that's generated. You know, I have been telling stories a long time, and this is one that caught my ear fairly recently. But first, I'll tell you that we hear these stories all different kinds of places. I tuned in the radio a number of years ago and caught just a little bit. Someone was talking about being on an airplane, and there was a little girl, a child. She was so excited. You could tell it was her very first time to fly. She was sitting by the window. Her mother was sitting right next to her, trying to keep her calm down, and the attendant had come by and given her a little pin to put on with some wings, and she was just so excited. And that plane started down the tarmac, started down the runway, and that moment of liftoff, we all know that, and then started kind of circling around a bit. Everything got very quiet on the plane. And then that little girl's voice, clear as a bell, said, "Mommy, when do we start getting small?" And I could just picture her watching her grandparents or family friends flying off and getting little bitty. And I've thought about that, and who knows that that doesn't happen? You know, we could be only this big when we're up there. There is magic that happens. And always in our lives, in the lives of us humans, forever, there has been magic. And a lot of that magic takes place around water, around a well. We don't think of wells much these days. There's still some communities where I live in North Carolina, there's still people that have dug a well, but it's still kind of all underground in pipes, and you don't really see wells, either bubbling out of the ground water. They also call those wells. But in a lot of countries, over in Ireland, they still have rituals where they go and tie a piece of ribbon or a piece of cloth on trees near wells to bring them good luck. This story that I'm going to tell you was first recorded over 500 years ago. In Shakespeare's time and before, people were listening to and telling this story. And I like to imagine and hope that in 500 years from now, people will be listening to and telling this story. Once, before anyone questioned whether stories were true, there was an island. It was far away from anything else. And there had been a king, but he had died. And his queen and 3 daughters, they were almost grown, lived there and ruled that kingdom. Everyone loved the queen. She was a fair, kind person. And they knew no trouble on that island. But that was to change. The queen took sick. People from the island were brought in, and when no one could heal her, word was sent from far away, bringing some of the best healers in the world to her bedside. But to no avail. Even the queen thought she was going to die. But then one day, she had a different thought. She turned over on her silken pillows, and she called her oldest daughter to her. And she said, "Child, I believe that if I could have a sip of water, of true water, from the well at the end of the world, I believe I could be healed." And the daughter said, "Mother, I've never heard of this well at the end of the world. It's true water." She said, "Oh, yes, daughter. My grandmother used to tell me, I've never been there, but it's very healing water. It's a long journey, though. And the oldest daughter said, oh, well, Mother, we have plenty of servants, lots of gold. I'm sure we can find someone to go and bring you some of this water. Oh, no, child. This is a journey of love. There's magic in it. That oldest daughter, she did not believe in magic. And she thought it must be the sickness making her mother talk like this. But she seemed so insistent. And the girl thought, well, it'd look bad if I don't go, and I guess I will. All right, Mother, I'll go. And so she was given a silver flask, and she headed off on that journey. And it was a long, hard one. Finally, she reached that place. There was water bubbling up out of the ground, and there was a rowan tree. They're known for magic, laden with red berries, moss around, and the girl thought, okay, I've got the flask, and she bent down to fill that flask with the water, and all of a sudden she heard something, "Quark, what do you think you're doing, huh, Quark?" And she looked around and didn't see anything. She thought maybe it was her imagination from this long journey, and she reached again. "Quark, no, I'm down here." And she looked, and there was an ugly, blotchy, huge frog. "Yes, it's me, Quark. Haven't you ever heard a frog talk? Huh, Quark? No? Don't you read fairy tales? Nah? Well, I don't know if I read fairy tales or believe in magic, but would you move to the side so I can fill this flask for my mother, the queen? She needs it." "Oh, no, dearie. Quark, no. You see, this water, the well, belongs to Quark, me, and you cannot get any of it yourself. Quark, no." "Well, then fill this flask quickly. It's for my mother, the queen." "Oh, no, dearie. No, Quark, no. You see, there's a little stipulation, Quark, yes. If you, Quark, are going to get this water, you, Quark, must marry me, Quark." "Marry you? Marry you? You're an ugly frog. I'm not going to marry you. Give me that flask." And she started walking away, mumbling to herself, "Certainly, Mother will understand. Have a son-in-law that's a frog, and an ugly one at that." And she mumbled and groaned the whole way back. She went in and told her mother. And her mother turned on those silken pillows, and she called the second daughter in. And much the same thing happened. And then the mother called the youngest daughter. She was very dear to her heart. And when that nut-brown princess came in, she was one who always ran instead of walked. And she would sing wherever she went. And her mother told her about this well at the end of the world. Told her about that well of true water. And the girl instantly said, "I'll go get it, Mother." She took that flask and she started off on that long, hard journey. She finally got there. She saw the rowan tree. She reached out and she took some of those red berries and put them behind her ear. And then she sat down and waited. Before long, Quark, that frog appeared. "Well, Quark, looks to me like we have another little dearie that has come along. And I think, Quark, I know why you are here, but Quark, I'll be letting you tell me, Quark." And the girl said, "Well, dear frog." "Oh, dear frog it is. Oh, Quark, I like that. Yes, yes." "Dear frog, my mother, the queen, she needs some of this water." "Quark, yes, And I guess you know about the stipulations, Quark, yes?" "Well, now, maybe I do, but I'll be letting you tell me." "Oh, Quark. Oh, she's a clever girl. Oh, Quark, I like that. Yes. Well, it is that if you get this water, Quark, you must marry me, Quark. And that girl looked at that horrendous-looking frog. She said, "Is there no other way?" "Quark, none." "Then yes, I will marry you to save my mother." "Oh, Quark, yes, we are married now because of the magic. You, my little wifey, yes, we are now married, Quark. Give me that flask." And he filled that flask with the water. And he said, "Quark, you go ahead, take this, Quark, to the queen. She will be healed, and I'll be coming soon. Yes, little wifey, your husband will be coming soon, Quark." And she took the flask and left. She went right back to the castle and gave her mother some of that water, and with the first swallow, the queen was healed. Word spread quickly throughout the castle, throughout the whole kingdom. People were so happy, but not everyone. Word was spread about that frog and the agreement that was made. And it was the oldest sister that came to her youngest sister and said, "What do you think you are doing? Bringing a frog into this family? Who is going to marry me if you marry a frog?" And the youngest sister kind of rolled her eyes and she said, "There was no choice. It's for our mother. You cannot talk me out of it." And she turned away from that sister. And that evening, when it was time for bed, the youngest princess went throughout the castle, deciding which room she would sleep in. She decided on one towards the front of the castle. She had just climbed into those silken sheets when she heard quack, tap, 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 and she went over to the window. She opened that window. That frog was uglier than she had remembered. "Quack, wifey, so nice to see you, Quack. I did tell you I would be alone, Quack." "Yes, husband, you did. Here, let me take you." And she picked that frog up gently and she set him on a pillow by the door. She said, "You must be so tired after this long trip. You rest there and we'll talk in the morning." She went over and she got back in bed. And just as her head touched that silken pillow, "Quack, quack, I don't like it, wifey. This pillow, it's stuffy. It's too hot for me, Quack. And there's a breeze underneath this door. I don't like that either, Quack." So that young princess got up. She moved the frog over towards the wall. And she said, "So you won't have a breeze on you, I'll put this little wooden container on top of you, a little basket. Now you sleep the night and we'll talk in the morning." And she got back in bed, and just as her head touched that pillow, "Quack, wifey, I don't like it here. It's too dark, Quack." She got back up and she moved that basket off his head, and then she brought the frog closer to her there on the floor right beside the bed. She got back in bed, put that cheek next to that silken pillow. She was so tired. What a day. "Quack, wifey, I don't like it here." And he wanted food. He wanted leaves. It was too hot. It was too cold. She even brought him up onto the bed on the pillow next to her. Quack, it was too slippery. He didn't like anything, Quack, about it. And finally he said, "Wifey, this will never do." The wife said, "But then what do you want?" "Quack! What is that on the wall, Quack, behind you?" She turned, and hanging there on the wall was a sword, a long sword her father had given her. And she said, "Oh, that was my father's. He said that I was to give it to my husband, though I'm not sure how I will give it to a frog." And the frog said, "I know, Quack. This will never work. We cannot live together like this. You must take that sword and cut off my head, Quark." And the princess said, I could not do that." "Yes, you must. You must. Take that sword and cut off my head, Quark, now, Quark." "No, I cannot do that." She'd grown quite fond of that frog. She said, "It was you that said we were husband and wife today by that well. I cannot kill you. You must, Quark, you must do it. Quark, right now, cut off my head. And back and forth they went. He insisting, she saying, no, she could not. He insisting. Finally, she got that sword and she cut that frog's head off. And standing there was a handsome young man. She said, what happened to that dear frog? And who are you? And he told her, he said, his body had been witched. He'd been in that frog's body and had to stay there for years, waiting for someone that would freely marry him and do his bidding all night long. And he said, and you, dear one, you have done that. And the two of them, when they first looked into each other's eyes, they were in love. And they spent the rest of their lives together, happy. And they might still be there now. Thank you. That's the well of true water. It comes from the Scottish tradition, and I haven't quite figured the whole story out. Not that you ever do on some of them. But there's something about that really draws me. And I know that sometimes the unconscious is thought of as water. And so I've been kind of playing around with some of that. And I knew from a long time ago, I had read and heard that the air that we are breathing on earth is the same air molecules that have always been here. So we're breathing the same air that our ancestors, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of years ago, the same air that they breathed. And just fairly recently, in the last year or two, I read in National Geographic that the same is true of water. It's all the same water. That we have the water in the ocean and in the rivers around here and all over the world. That water is taken up into the sky, put into the clouds, and then the storms come, and every bit of water is the same water. So it might be when we take a little break today and drink a little bit of water, maybe it will be some drops from that well of true water. Thank you. Now, I like when I have smaller groups to be able to open it up to questions. So if anyone happens to have anything you would like to ask about storytelling or making your living this way, traveling around, learning a story, we'll take just a moment in between each of the stories and see if there's anything that you would like to ask. And does anybody have anything right now? So you can think about it, and if anything rises up after this next story, you can give it a try. This next story is kind of a new one for me, so I think I'm going to record it. I'm really not a writer at all. I'm one of those people that I revert back to fourth grade if I have to write something, that blank page or the blank computer screen, and I go, know anything. And so I really am, I've discovered this about myself, that I really am very oral. So the way that I work on stories is, now I've worked on this story some before, I've told it a couple of times, but when it's a new story especially, I continue recording myself so I hear what it is, and you bring out things in the telling, and I like to have a recording of that on some of the new ones, so we'll get that going. So my husband, Phil Blake, is a great athlete, but you would not know that to look at him. He's kind of small, wiry, actually the perfect body for bicycle riding. And a number of years ago, he decided to kind of get into that. Now, we live in Asheville, North Carolina, and there's not a lot of level places around there to bike ride. And my idea of fun is going downhill, all downhill. And I actually did that once down a mountain out in Colorado, Pikes Peak, a very tall 12,000-foot mountain. And we took a tour coming down, where they drove us up to the top of the mountain. And I remember my husband, when we were planning our trip out to Colorado, my husband was looking online at some things we might do out there, and he found this tour where you could go up and ride down, and he had gotten into riding. He said, "What do you think?" And I remembered that adage, once you've ridden a bike, you never forget. And I said, "Well, I'm not sure, but I'd have to practice a little bit." And so he took me to a little level place down near our mailbox. Our mailbox is on a paved road. We live on a dirt road. So we went down there, and that adage is not true. You do not necessarily remember instantly. I was like this, but he seemed to really want to do this trip down. And so I thought, well, so I worked at it a little bit. We found a few more level spots. And then I realized I was not going to probably be able to do anything uphill at all, but I could do downhill. And I got to where I really liked it. And we had a little truck at the time, and Phil took me out several places in the mountains to deserted roads that didn't have much traffic. And we'd get to the top of the mountain or hill, and then we'd unload the bike. I'd get on it in the front, and he'd ride behind me so no car could come up quickly on me. And I just got to where I was flying down those mountains. I loved it. So when we went out to Pikes Peak, we got there, it was a sunrise morning. We had flown from Asheville to Charlotte, and then ended up taking a couple of different connections to get out to Colorado. When we got up the mountain, it was a perfectly clear day. The tour guides were so impressed. We heard them talking in the front seat. They almost never got to see this mountain with this much clearness early in the morning. They said it was usually fogged in. It was gorgeous. The sun hadn't risen yet. We drove all the way to the top, and they told us the height up there, and they warned us we might have a little trouble breathing. It was over 12,000 feet high, and it was higher than my husband and I had flown from Asheville to Charlotte. We had flown at about 10,000 feet. I remember getting out of that van, and it was deserted up there. We were the only ones there. The tour guides were unloading the bikes, getting things ready, and I wanted to take a bathroom run, and I asked, and they said, "Oh yeah, there's some public restrooms over there." I was having a little trouble breathing. It was really intense, cold as well. But I went over and went to the restroom, and when I came out of the bathroom, I saw them kind of gathering around like maybe they were going to leave pretty soon. So I started running back. By the time I got to them, I was gasping and almost keeling over, but they fitted me on the bike, and we started down. It was thrilling. They have races up there, and the whole top part of it, big drop-offs, no guardrail whatsoever. But I was in the lead most of the time as long as we were going downhill. As soon as it leveled off, and there were just a couple of places where it rose just a little in the other direction, I was quickly at the back of the group. And then once again when we started going down, so I learned that about myself. But Phil, as he was starting to do bike riding, I was still liking only going downhill, but Phil decided he was going to bike up Mount Mitchell. That is the tallest peak in the United States east of the Rockies. It sits right on the parkway, Two-Lane National Park, and we live fairly close to that. It goes right through Asheville, and we're not far from where that parkway cuts through. So Phil had talked to some friends, buddies, that he was wanting to do this, and one friend told him about these special bike shoes. A lot of y'all might already know about it. Maybe you've used them. But you buy them, and they come kind of in two sections. You put the shoe on, and there are little knobs on the bottom of it. And then you get another piece that hooks on to the pedal of your bike. So you've got 4 different things that you walk away with. Well, Phil went down to a bike shop downtown, and the guy was really nice, the owner. He told him all about it, fitted him in the shoes, and then he showed him how you put your leg over that bike, click your foot in so it is attached to that pedal. And then as you're going, you start to go and you click that other foot in. Took him out into the parking lot, showed him how to do it, and he said, but really, what you want to be sure to do is practice getting out of this situation. And so he showed Phil how you take your heel and you click it out, and then the other heel, and you are released from those pedals. I thought of it kind of as the opposite of the Wizard of Oz. Instead of clicking your heels together, you had to click them out. Well, Phil was delighted. He paid his money, and as he was leaving, the shop owner said, be sure and practice that release. And Phil left. It was a perfect day for riding. It was late spring, but where we are, there's still a nip in the air, especially once you get up on the parkway. Phil came right home. Now, we live on a very steep driveway on the side of a mountain, but there's a little level space right outside our garage doors. So Phil put those units, those pieces onto the pedals of his bike. He put on the shoes, clicked them in, tried around in a circle a few times, released. He felt fine about it, and then he ran upstairs to get dressed. Now, a word about bike fashion. It usually entails tight spandex shorts. Phil's were black, and then a tight spandex brightly colored shirt. Picture yellow and black stripes. And then this pretty much dorky helmet. Comes to a big old point at the top. And there's a little bitty rear view mirror sticking out the side. A little tiny mirror, kind of like the type that a dentist might use to look inside your mouth. So Phil got ready and back down to our little truck. He put his bike into the back of the truck and drove up to the parkway. Found an easy parking place and got that bike out. And the idea with these pedals is not only are you pushing down on one pedal using that leg's muscle, but you're pulling up at the same time on the other pedal. So you're really getting double duty every single time you push and pull that pedal. And that's why it's supposed to be so good in the mountains, especially. So Phil got on the bike, he clicked his feet in, and he started north up on the parkway. He went a few miles. It was really working. He was astounded by it. He saw a pull off, and so he pulled over there and unclicked, released those shoes, got a little bit of water, and got right back on the bike. He was really up for this. It was such perfect weather, that little bit of coolness, and he got back on the bike, got his feet into the pedals, and started going. He was seeing these ancient rock formations, huge vistas of mountains and communities. He was driving through dark, damp tunnels, coming out into that bright sunshine on the other side. He kept going, and then he heard something behind him, thought it was behind him. He looked in that little rearview mirror, and sure enough, there was a motorcyclist coming up behind him. Now, he had gone about 9 miles by this time, and he was feeling a little tired. He thought, this will be a good time to pull over, rest for a moment, let that guy go on by me. So he was going uphill. He'd been going uphill the whole time. He was going uphill, and if you want to slow down when you're going uphill, all you do is stop pedaling, and you kind of slow down really quickly, and that's what he did. He saw a little grassy area over to the side, and he was kind of aiming for that, and he forgot to release his feet. And when a bike upright comes to a stop with a person on it, here's what it does. It falls. He fell right on the ground just as that motorcyclist went by. Now, he wasn't hurt much. He was scraped just a little bit. And the motorcyclist put on his brakes, and it took him a little bit to stop. And then he started backing up. Phil's trying to disengage himself from those bike pedals, and he looks up and sees this guy backing up to him. From his angle, looked like he was about 8 feet tall, 350 pounds. He had a big old leather jacket on. Phil said he could practically see the tattoos through that jacket. Phil's getting all this gasoline in his face, and he backs up the whole way until he's right beside Phil, who is still on the ground, and he says, "Hey, buddy, you all right?" And Phil, he's fully aware of this dorky helmet that he has on, this yellow and black top, looking like a bruised bumblebee. He looked up and he started explaining about the shoes and how he had just gotten them, and the guy just didn't get it. So Phil said, "Yeah, I'm all right." "Okay," and he took off. Well, Phil pulled himself over a little bit closer into all that grass, took out some water, and sat there, caught his breath some, and started thinking about his next goal. For that day, he wanted to make it as far as Craggy Gardens, one of the most beautiful spots on the whole parkway. It overlooks Asheville's water system, a pristine lake there. It's actually where the Hunger Games, the very first one, was filmed. On the other side, there's a little welcome center, not very big though, small parking lot. And he thought if he could make it there for this day, he would be really pleased. It was about 4 or 5 miles further, but all of it really steep. And almost none of it are you able to pull off. They don't want anyone pulling off near that water system, the water supply for Asheville. And a lot of it is just sheer cliffs. So there is a guardrail that's really tight to the road. Right on the other side of that guardrail, most of it was sheer, right down mountain. So Phil took some deep breaths though, stretched a little bit, got back on that bike, and he started going. And another motorcycle passed him. You know, that noise, it was so loud, and the smell, and once it was gone, it would just be so peaceful. Nothing, no sound except nature. This was so strenuous, though. We had to stand up for a lot of this to bike it. It was that steep. And another motorcyclist went by, and another cut in so quick, Phil was afraid he was going to tap him on his behind. He was that close coming to him. But Phil kept going, trying to keep his focus. It was really hard with that guardrail so close by, but he was doing it, and he finally got almost there. He knew he only had a couple of more curves to go, and his legs were screaming at him to stop, but he did not stop. He came around a corner, and he saw that welcome center. It was in view, his nirvana, his goal, there it was. The parking lot was kind of filled, lots of motorcycles, and lots of motorcyclists, guys, they were all standing around. Phil saw that he had 100 yards to go. He knew now that he could make it. 50 yards to go. His legs were burning. 20 yards to go. His legs were screaming at him to stop, but he had it now. He knew it. 10 yards to go. He pulled across that road. It was over on the left. He pulled across the road for traffic coming the other way. He pulled right into that parking lot, came to a stop, and damn if he didn't forget again. Yeah, right on his side. Well, that group of 20, 8 feet tall people came over and started looking down on him, all in leather jackets, and one of them stepped forward and he said, "Hey, buddy, Are you all right?" And Phil looked up, and before he could say anything, one of them stepped out from the others. Phil recognized him right away. 350 pounds, 8 feet tall, tattoos. Looked down at Phil and he said, He looked back at his buddies. He said, "He's all right. That's just the way he rides." And that's Phil's bike story. Thank you. So Any questions, anything y'all want to ask about any of this storytelling stuff? I hope you'll think about telling stories. Often when we hear stories, it reminds us of a story. Maybe you have a bike story or something similar to that, or you remember one of your kids or your mom or your dad or yourself. So think about that, and I'm going to tell another story here, but when lunchtime comes up, maybe you'll be sitting next to someone, either someone you came with or someone you're just meeting, and ask them if maybe they wouldn't want to hear just a little snippet of a story and give it a try. I'll let you know I do storytelling workshops, and some from one day all the way through weekend workshops to a full week. And if you're interested in knowing where I'm going to be performing or about those workshops, you can sign up over where the resources are, the CDs and DVDs. I have a sign-up sheet there. You can put your email address and name and such if you'd like to know about any of that. And I mentioned last night about a nonprofit that is dear to my heart. I'll tell you just a tiny bit about it in case you want to get any of the jewelry over there along with those CDs. It's a nonprofit in Africa called Bead for Life. And it's also headquartered here in the United States. And people all over North America give bead parties where they sell this jewelry made out of paper and help the women have a rich, full life and their children have a rich, full life in southern Uganda. They have a great website so you can read about that, and you also can buy some of that jewelry. I'm a volunteer with them, so all the monies go back, and there's a great laminated sheet that shows you where those monies go. It's a very highly rated nonprofit. So I think I'm going to tell you a story about my mom, about her living and her dying. My mom, Mary Agnes Freeman Reagan. She was a very festive woman. She loved to get dressed up and go out to friends' homes. They would dance and play games. I always thought it was good that my father also liked those things. When they were first married and had 2 young children, I remember one of the stories that were told. They were both Catholics and really devoted to their faith and to going to church on Sunday. Back then, you could only go on Sunday, but they didn't have a car. And so they worked out a system where one of them would get up very early, take the bus to the church, take that bus back home, and then they would get off at a stop on this side of the block, race through the backyards, relieve the other one from the babysitting, and that one would catch the bus when it had gone around the block on the other side. Now, there was one day that they were living in Mobile, Alabama. It was late winter, and there was a Mardi Gras celebration there in Mobile. My parents had gone to it, and on the way home, by now they had a car. On the way home, they had to make a detour for the hospital because that's the night that I was welcomed into this world. My mom's friends, I actually came out feet first, and my mom's friends said that was because she had danced her way through the pregnancy. Now, my mom, when the 3 of us were growing up, she had 2 phrases that we could always depend on her saying. One was, "It's a miracle." If she loved to garden flowers, and we lived for a time in Alabama, then down into Jacksonville, Florida. And when we were in Florida, you know, the weather can get so hot there. And if her beautiful roses and other flowers were all blooming and needing watering, and she was thinking she was going to need to spend the afternoon moving that sprinkler around, and then it started raining, Mom would say, "It's a miracle." If she was downtown shopping and she found a pair of capri pants in her size, in the color she loved, and they were on sale, "It's a miracle." Her other favorite phrase was, "It's a sin." And I actually heard that a good bit when I was growing up, especially when I got into my teenage years and on into college. I kind of leaned towards the hippie style of dress, and I'd come up, and give her a kiss goodbye as I was heading out to meet friends without many undergarments and long skirts. And she said, "Are you going out dressed like that? It's a sin." She also loved soap operas. She never was much of a reader. I never did see her almost ever reading a full book. But if she had free time, she did a lot of volunteer work for the church and for voters' rights. She would go out and register people to vote or collect money for the March of Dimes. She kept very busy. But if she had an afternoon at home, then she liked to watch the soap operas. My Stories, she called them. And if one of her soap operas got blacked out because there was a Jaguar football game, you would hear, "It's a sin." Though later, she became a Jaguar fan. And she shifted a little bit. If the game was blocked out, "It's a sin." Now, sometimes she would get that sin and miracle kind of mixed up. Once I was down there visiting her, and I would usually try to book a couple of schools to perform in the afternoons or mornings while I was visiting her. So it'd be a combination family visit and working too. So I could visit my parents. By now, my father had passed away, so I was trying to visit even more often. This particular day, I was telling stories at an elementary school, and it was in the afternoon, so I came around. Mom was already sitting in her chair in front of the TV. It was off, but she was ready for the soap operas that afternoon. And sitting on the armrest of her chair was a big, thick book. And I looked down, and it was called A Book of Miracles. I was surprised to see that book, but I gave her a big hug, and I headed on out. I was gone for 2 or 3 hours, and when I came back in, Mom was still sitting in that chair. She had that book opened on her lap, and she looked up at me and she said, "Connie, it's a sin. I've sat here all afternoon, read this book of miracles, and I've missed my stories." I was like, whoa. It was a couple of years after that I was telling stories up in Providence, Rhode Island, and I was heading back home. So I had to fly from Providence into LaGuardia, New York, and then down to Charlotte and a final leg into Asheville. Well, the very first part of that trip, it was a small plane, and the skies were kind of dark, and we were being buffeted around. That wind was really blowing, and we landed and went into the terminal, and I've never been quite sure why they call those terminals. There's not, but we got into the terminal, and there was word going around. There was a huge storm coming from the east. And there was this tension that started building. And all of a sudden you saw where flights were being delayed. And I always have had pretty much of a Zen approach to flying and traveling. I'm either going to get on that plane or not. I'm either going to get there on time or not. There's not really much you can do about it. So as I saw those delayed change to canceled, including my flight, I got into this long line that was snaking up towards an agent. I was just, going to see what would happen and inching my way up. Just as I got in front of that agent, I heard an announcement. "Flight 405 leaving for Jacksonville, Florida, gate 4. I turned around, and gate 4 was right across the hall. I looked at that agent and I said, "My mother lives in Jacksonville. Can I get on that plane?" And I think she was so thrilled to see a happy face in this sea of angry people. This was before 9/11. She said, "I'll go see." She went running across, opened the door, went down, must have asked the pilot to wait. She came running back and she said, "Are you sure your mother is at home?" I said, I better call her. Now, this was before cell phones. And if she had gone on a trip, I would have known it. But Mom, she was in her 80s at this time in very good health. And she had a good friend that was a travel agent, a lot younger than she was. And a lot of times, if that person was taking a weekend trip there in Florida, she had an extra seat, she'd just ask Mom to come along. And so Mom took lots of trips with her. So the woman handed me her phone that was attached to the agent's desk, and I called Mom, and Mom was delighted. Yes, she was at home. So like that, I was on a flight heading for Jacksonville, Florida. Before I left, the agent had booked me on a flight the next day, the last one out. I didn't have to fly out until like 5 or 6 o'clock that early evening. She also gave me 2 vouchers for cabs so that when I got there, I could have a free ride to my mom's house and get one the next day back to the airport. So here I was flying into Jacksonville. I got there and I had no luggage. That was all on the plane. I handed my voucher over to the taxi driver and he took me right to Mom's. I arranged with him to pick me up there the next day. That was after midnight by the time that I got there. And the plan always was, if I was getting home late, that Mom would leave the front porch light on, the front door would be unlocked, and she would go on to bed. So I walked up the walkway, got to the front porch, and I turned the door handle of that front door, and I felt it turning on the other side too. Opened it up, and standing in the living room there was my mom. She had on her white satin long nightgown. She had a little white satin nightcap to keep her hairdo poofy. She gave me a big hug, and she said, "It's a miracle." And she went to bed. Well, the next morning, she let me sleep in, and when I got up, I said, "Mom, this is a given day, a day out of the ordinary. We can do anything you want to do. If you want to go down to the beach, we can go do errands, visit friends, I'll do house cleaning. Anything you want to do, I'm ready." My mother did not miss a beat. She said, "I've been thinking about this all day, and I want to go pick out my coffin." I said, "Really?" Now, my mom was not sick, and I had said anything, but I was not expecting coffin. She said, "Yep, while you're here, I've been thinking about it, and you know how I like to get things done ahead of time, so let's go." I said, "Okay." Well, first, she wanted me to help her pick out what dress she would be buried in. She had narrowed it down to 3. We went into the guest bedroom, and she had them hanging on the back of the door. She took down the first one. It was lime green, but it was long. We decided it was a little too formal. We put that one back. The second one, my mom really liked. It was a deep fuchsia pink suede suit. Now, she knew she looked good in that outfit, but she decided she would be too hot. So she put that one back. We got the third one, and it was a light blue chiffon pink. Lovely. And we decided that was perfect, cocktail length. We then got in the car and headed for the funeral home. Mom had already called them. They were waiting for us, and they welcomed us in to a huge room about the size of this one, filled with coffins. But first, we had to pick out the lining of the coffin. There was the colors: white, off-white, pearl white, almost white, nearly white. Then there was the texture. It could be smooth or brocade or satin. And then the coffins themselves, 2 main categories: metal and wood. And under wood, there was mahogany, oak, cherry. Over on this side were the colors of that metal coffin. There was silver, gray, blue, maroon. Mom said, "All these choices, it's a sin." But we settled in on a pearl white, smooth lining. It was actually a fashion decision. We thought that light blue dress would look good in there. And then Mom decided she wanted a silvery blue metal coffin. She signed all the papers, and we walked out. Mom was beaming. She was so happy. We got in the car and headed for the cemetery. Now, this was actually part of our journey every time I came home after my dad passed away. We'd always go to his grave and tell some stories, and his was right there, and right next to it was where Mom's was going to be. We would brush off the top of it, make sure there were some flowers in the container. And we told some daddy stories. Then we went right across the street to Bono's Barbecue, best barbecue in Jacksonville, and then we headed back home. Now, we got back home, and without even going inside, we walked around the house looking at Mama's flowers. Those things that were in full bloom, the ones that were almost still in bud but coming along, and those that were spent. We looked all the way around. We came back to the porch, and Mom said, "Connie, this has been one of the best days of my life." Now, I knew she was exaggerating a little bit. My mom had had some pretty good days in her life. But on another level, I knew just what she meant. It was this attending to living and dying that had made both of us feel so alive. About that time, the cab driver pulled in. I gave Mom a big hug, and I stepped in, handed my voucher, and headed for the airport. When I got there, in a very short line, and when I got up to the agent, they saw where all I'd been. They said, "My gracious, you deserve first class." I thought, oh, it's a miracle. Well, my mom's dream had been to be living in the family home for her 90th birthday. And that's just what happened. We had a grand celebration. But it wasn't too much longer after that she announced to us it was time for her to go into assisted living. And then before long, she went into the hospital. And from there, she came out and went into a nursing home. And back to the hospital. And then it was suggested that she go into hospice. And Mom thought that was a good idea. A beautiful facility there in Jacksonville. Well, it was in the summertime, and I was able to be with her a lot during that summer. I didn't have too many bookings. I thought that was a miracle too. We had wonderful times. Now, in hospice, actually at that facility, they had gathered the family together and said, we don't know for sure, but probably a few days or maybe a week. Mother blossomed there. 2 months later, she was still alive. All of her friends were coming to visit. She was sitting up in the bed like a queen with royalty being attended to, a kind queen. I was there visiting at the end of August, and Mom was so comfortable about dying. She had really helped me be comfortable about that too. But I was sad that it looked like I was not going to be able to be with her. And I had wanted to help usher her out the way that she had welcomed me in. And it looked like that was not going to happen. I had a lot of bookings that fall. So we said our deep goodbyes, and I left. Well, a week and a half later, Mom was still alive. And I woke up, I was supposed to be flying to Chicago for the Illinois Storytelling Festival. But something in me just said I needed to go to Jacksonville. I called down and spoke with the hospice nurses, and they assured me Mom was fine, but I just knew. So I called Jim May, another beloved storyteller. He ran that festival. And I told him what was going on, and he gave me his blessings. He said, we have plenty of other tellers. And so I didn't even call hospice back. I just got in the car, and I headed for Jacksonville. The next morning, I went over to the hospice center, and I was standing at the door. Mom was there. There was a nurse with her, and Mom turned, and she saw me, and she said, Connie, is it really you? And she turned back to that nurse, am I dreaming? And back to me. I went over and gave her a big hug, and she fell into a deep sleep. She slept the whole part of that day. Late afternoon, she woke up and she turned to me and she said, "Connie, I'm so comfortable." Those were the last words that she spoke. She slept through the night, and the next morning, an early afternoon on Sunday, September 21st, 2003, the air in the room changed, and Mary Agnes Freeman Reagan took her last inhalation, and then 3 slow exhalations. And she had gotten just what she wanted, a quiet, peaceful death. And I had gotten just what I wanted, to be a witness. It was a miracle. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll say that when that story was first coming to me, and for a long time I'd written down those 2 phrases, "It's a miracle, it's a sin." And I thought I would do a story about that while she was still alive, but it didn't happen. And then it started evolving and coming together, but I wasn't really sure if it would be a story I'd be able to tell, if it was just too personal or too tender. And I debuted it at the National Storytelling Festival on a Sunday morning. They have sacred telling in the huge tents. And I told it there, and a young woman came up to me afterwards. She told me she was in her 20s. She had her sister, her older sister, who was 2 years older, holding her hand. And they came up to me, and she was crying, and she said that their mother had died when they were teenagers. And it had been a very hard death, which sometimes death is. And she said, "I never knew that death could be easy." And she was really grateful that I had told that story. So that gave me not only permission, but it gave me encouragement to tell this story. And it was a couple of months after that, I was back in Jonesboro doing, I guess it was maybe the next summer, doing what they call Teller in Residence. I was there for a whole week. And during that week, I told that story. And afterwards, another woman came up to me, but she was a little bit older. She announced she was 93. She had 2 daughters in hand. She had red rouge, red lipstick, and really bright blue eyeshadow. She walked right up to me after that performance, and she said, "I've been telling them for years I want to go pick out my coffin. We are going this afternoon." So, another reason to tell that story. You have been delightful listeners. Thank you so much, and I hope you'll continue listening all afternoon. And I'm telling a story about my cousin, Barbara, this afternoon. So if you happen to be able to catch that session, and tonight I'm part of the ghost storytelling. But there's a lot more going on. Go over and check out the beads and the CDs and DVDs and such. And thank you very much.